Hi, everybody. My name is Ann Dolin, and welcome. Today, we're talking about the changing landscape of college admissions in the year of COVID and beyond. For the last 22 years, my tutors and I have been helping students prepare for the SAT, ACT, and complete their college applications. But in no time have things been so different than now. And it's not just because of COVID. We've seen a shift in college admissions testing, for example, for a few years now. So today we'll talk about all those changes and what parents can expect in the coming years. We'll also talk about the role of tests. Do the SAT and the ACT mean as much as they did, say, last year and in the past years? And if your child does decide to submit a test, which one is best for them? And then we'll talk about the rising importance of essays, recommendations, and AP scores. Also, I put a lot of this information together in a handout for you, and you can get it easily by texting 55444 and the words college. So let's get started. Every fall I traveled, past tense, to high schools in our area in Northern Virginia and DC and talked about college admissions. But this year has been really different. Not only is the content different, but certainly it's all on webinar. But last year, in speaking to schools, this is a graph that I shared with them, which I found to be really helpful. It's actually a survey of college admissions officials in colleges across the country. And they were asked, when you evaluate a student's application, what do you look for? And 89% of admissions folks said they look for grades in college prep courses. Those were the most important factors. So not as much as what'd you get in PE, but certainly how'd you do in math, English, science, history, and the foreign language. Next up, strength of the curriculum. If you had the opportunity at your school to be challenged by taking an honors, AP, IB, or dual enrollment class, did you? How many courses did you take to challenge yourself? That was at 87%. And right behind that at 82% were scores on admissions tests, the SAT and the ACT. So really it was these three factors that were most compelling when admissions folks looked at kids' applications. But this year, it's really different. If you're a senior, it's changed significantly. So right now, this is what schools are looking for. Grades in college prep classes, just like before. This is the most important factor. The strength of the curriculum. When available, did you challenge yourself? And then essays, things like extracurriculars, what you did in your spare time, recommendations, and AP and IB test scores. And what you'll see for seniors is that the SAT and ACT are not on this list. And here's why. Because so many tests across the country were canceled due to COVID and high schools being closed, which is usually where kids take them, that not every student, even if they prepared, had the opportunity to test. And it wouldn't really be fair to evaluate two kids. One could take a test and one couldn't, and make a decision. So colleges throughout the nation said, you know what, we're not going to consider test scores this year. Now, that's for seniors. They're applying now. However, it may be different for juniors, sophomores, and even freshmen. So let's talk about the things that are going to be important across the board for everybody. And the first thing is essays. We're seeing a rising importance of essays because essays allow kids to explain to admissions officials what makes them special. What is it about them that's going to make a difference in their school? And why do they even want to come to the school in the first place? So there's three ways that you can apply to colleges through three different types of applications. Some schools, in fact, most schools are on the Common App. That's why it's called the Common App. It's actually the most common. And this way, when you write the main essay, you can use that essay for all the schools that are on the Common App. You can actually tweak it if you want, but it's the same prompt. Here's a common prompt that many kids will write about. Some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, please share your story. So if you pick this one, you have 650 words to tell all about you. There's also the Coalition app, and this is a newer type of application. For example, Virginia Tech uses the Coalition app, and it has its own essay. And then some schools don't use either one of these. They have their own way of, they have their own application system that they use. So here's what's tricky about essays. Often, especially if this is the oldest child in the family and they've never been through this, and it's been many, many years since parents have, they don't really understand how much work the essays can be. So they think, oh, a bunch of my schools are on the Common App. I just have to write one essay. Not true. Here's why. In addition to, the essay on, say, the Common App, every school could have their own set of essays. Many schools have 2 essays you have to write. Some have 3, some have 1, some have none. But for example, UVA, they've got 2 additional essays that you should write and submit. And these take a lot of work. So if you think the average student applies to between 7 and 10 colleges in our area, it's a lot. So let's say they all write the Common App, they have a coalition app, and maybe they have their own schools app. Plus each college has 2 essays. Boy, it's a ton of work. So we always encourage kids to start as early as possible. Even at the end of their junior year, they should be typing away and starting some drafts, really with the eventual idea that they want to apply early action to get their applications in by November 1st, so that they can really, and truthfully, if they can get everything done over the summer, that's the best, because really you want to focus on your grades the first quarter or the first semester of your senior year, because those grades are still super important and colleges still look at those grades. So you want to do a good job. This is something new on the Common App. There's now a COVID essay. And basically it says, if something, occurred to you during COVID that you want to write about, you can. You only have 250 words, but we encourage kids only to do this if they can write about something worthy. For example, maybe they started their own business or they made a difference in their community. Great. But if they kind of just sat around and watched Netflix a lot and they don't have much to write about, don't worry about it. This is, honestly, it really is optional. All right, so let's move on to test scores. As I mentioned, for seniors, not required, and all schools right now are test optional. But here's the thing, we really don't know which schools are still going to be test optional for juniors, sophomores, and freshmen. But right now, I'm going off of what schools say on their website they're expecting from current juniors. And we'll talk about that school by school in a second. Because really there's 3 categories for required test scores. One is for those schools that say, you know what, we want a test score, we want another data point. Usually their school is so competitive that when lots of kids have great grades, and they're involved in lots of extracurriculars, they have great recommendations. What is another data point? So they may want to see a test score. So they're required. You have to submit one, either the SAT or the ACT, or you can even submit both. So those are required schools. Then this is the up and coming one, test optional. These are schools that say, you know what, if you want to submit a score, you can, but you don't have to, and it's okay, and we won't hold that against you. However, last year, about 70% of kids applying to a test optional school still submitted a test score. So we've been encouraging our kids that if it helps your application, we'll talk about that in a minute, and the school is test optional, you should go ahead and submit it. So that's test optional. And then this is a small cohort of schools, but they're test blind. And that means that even if you submit an amazing perfect score, they don't care, because they don't even consider test scores in their decisions. They go off of grades and other factors because they are test blind. All right, so this is what it's looking like right now. Again, could change for schools in our area in Virginia. UVA, required. Virginia Tech, required. William and Mary is interesting. They're doing a 3-year test optional pilot. So they're saying, you know what? Things are so crazy right now. We're going to try this out, test optional, for 3 years. And after that time, if we find that, you know what, there's really no difference in the kids we accept, then we're just going to stay test optional. JMU has been test optional for about 3 years. George Mason was actually the first school in our area to go test optional. Although, like many schools that are test optional, some colleges within the university will require you to submit a test score, like the School of Engineering, for example. Christopher Newport, also test optional. And VCU is test optional, but they're interesting because they'll say, but recommended. And I remember when my youngest son was applying to colleges last year, he had VCU on his list. And I don't know why, but he never submitted a test score. And they were on him like anything. You know, they texted him, they emailed him, they called him, they even called me and wanted to make sure that he would submit his test score, which he did. And he had a great test score, so I don't even know why he didn't in the first place, but it's recommended at VCU. All right, so here's what you need to know if you have a junior for testing, and you can think ahead if you're a freshman or a sophomore. You know, the first step that we recommend to our students is you need to figure out which test is going to be best for you if you want to take a test. And we recommend that kids do, at least they sit for a practice test, or maybe they sit for a real test, but really they want to figure out which test they're best at. And here's the reason. Every school in America accepts both tests. They all accept either the SAT, ACT, they don't care. And they don't have a preference either. So your job as a student is to figure out which one am I naturally best on, because about 1/3 of kids will have a natural proclivity to one test over another. They just are better scoring on that test. But for most kids, about 2/3 of the kids, it's a toss-up. They kind of do the same on both tests. And then it comes really down to personal preference. You know, a lot of times kids will say, well, I like the ACT because I like the types of questions. Other kids will say, you know what, I didn't like that test at all because it was way too fast for me. So kids will absolutely be able to tell you which one they liked best. And I encourage this, you know, although we could say, well, the PSAT is kind of like the SAT, it's actually really different. So to really know which test you're best at and just to prep for that test is, I think, a good idea. You can eventually take both tests because there is some overlap, and prepping for one test can certainly help you for the other. But if you're like most teenagers, you're pretty pressed for time, and you're only willing to put so much effort into this because your grades are more important, quite frankly. So for that reason, don't divide your time and your effort and your money. You know, just go in one direction and study for that test. So we offer practice tests that don't go on your record. They're just for your information, free. If you want to get a coupon, and they're most weekends on a Saturday morning, and they're virtual. So it's so easy. Kids roll out of that if they take a test. And you can get that coupon by texting 55444 in the word college, and it will be sent to you with that information. But so what we'll do is we'll take the SAT and we'll take the ACT practice test score. These are retired tests, so they're pretty similar to what kids take now. We'll put them in a concordance table, and we'll tell you and your child which one they're scoring best on, or if it's about the same. And then at that point, kids can make a decision. Also, sometimes kids won't be great test takers and their score is not good at all, but they've got fabulous grades because they're a really hard worker. You know, what do you do in that case? Well, in general, the idea is any college, all colleges that accept a test on their website, they'll tell you the range of their mid 50th percentile accepted freshmen from the year before. So you can go on and you can see where those kids are landing. So for example, at William and Mary, the ACT, I'll just take that one, is between a 30 and a 34. So really you want to be in that range, hopefully on the other end, to help your application. But if you have like a 25 or a 28 or below that threshold, I wouldn't recommend that you submit your score because it doesn't really help your application. You want to help your application by submitting a score that is really in line with what they're looking for. So here's the biggest differences. The SAT, it's a power test. There's fewer questions, but they're wordier and they require some critical thinking and analysis. So sometimes kids will say, are they really asking me in this question? I'm not sure. So the difficulty, honestly, is in the interpretation. The ACT, it's definitely more straightforward. Kids get the questions. They're like, yes, I know what they're asking me, but oh, boy, is this fast. So there's more questions, but they're shorter, and it goes like this. So in general, what we find is that some kids, are okay with the pace because the questions feel easier. However, if your child has accommodations, like they might get time and a half, for example, in general, the ACT is the better test for them because the difficulty is in the pacing and in the speed. And when you remove that factor, it's often that they score better under extended time than they do on the SAT. So here's what the tests are like. The SAT has 2 sections, math and evidence-based reading and writing, for a total of 1,600 points. And there is an optional essay. We used to have, even 2 years ago, make sure the kids took it because some schools wanted it. These days, schools don't want the essay. You don't have to take it unless you're applying to a super top tier college that says, I absolutely want it. And I think there's like 5 of those left. But the test is long. With the essay, it's 3 hours and 50 minutes. Now, the ACT is different. It has 4 sections: math, reading, writing, which is grammar, similar to the SAT. And then there's a science section, which sometimes kids will freak out about, and they'll say, oh, science, oh, I hated biology. I can't stand physics. Oh, I don't want to take the ACT. But here's the thing. It's actually more like reading comprehension. You get graphs and charts, and you have to extrapolate the information. And I think out of all the sections, it's the most coachable. So don't be scared off by science if you don't like science. The total is 36 points. Also has an optional essay. You don't have to take it. But with that, it's about 3.5 hours. So again, a long test. But here's what we're recommending as kids look forward to, all right, when should I take these tests? Statistically speaking, kids score their best score in the spring of their junior year. And here's why. They're older, they're more mature, and they have more curriculum under their belts. They've just been in school longer, so they've learned more information. So, in past years, we've seen this huge trend to pushing tests the fall of the junior year just to get them out of the way. And that's fine, but we always encourage kids like, you know what, great. If you're happy with your score, awesome. But if you want to try again, go for it in the spring of your junior year, even the fall of your senior year, if you want to take it again. So for example, you want to pick 2 dates that are kind of close. So if you want to go with the ACT, maybe you pick the December and February date, or maybe the February and April date. For the SAT, the December and March, or maybe the March and May, for example. And the reason I like that is because now you have a game plan. You take your first test, you see how it goes, you get your scores back, and you look to see, where can I still improve? If you want to improve your score, and most kids do because they take it 2 or 3 times, and then you look at those weak areas and you specifically prep for those weak areas, because you can improve your score the most by working on your weak areas that we're already taking things that you're good at and trying to improve those even more. That's harder to do. So you're going to have to be flexible with dates. Who knows what cancellations are going to look like, but I would encourage you at least to get 1 date on the books. And then as more tests get released, sign up for an additional date too. If you want to prep, which most kids do, I can help you with that. Just shoot me an email, I'll give you that, or my testing coordinator, Karen, can. And we always help families decide, how far out should they prep? Because honestly, it depends where you're starting. Some kids don't prep at all. Some kids will prep for a couple of months. Some kids, will span it out 5 months because they've got some ground to make up. And there's actually 4 ways kids can prepare without spending any money. You can buy a book at Barnes & Noble, for example, and you can practice independently, although I guess that's $20. You can practice online for free, and there's tons of free resources. If you go to a public school, you likely have Naviance, and Naviance is unbelievably powerful. It's like such a great way to think about whether you have a chance of getting into different colleges based on the test scores and grades of kids at your school, which is more important than looking at generic numbers you see on a website, which is across the country. So Naviance has free prep. The College Board, which produces the SAT, has partnered with Khan Academy for free stuff, and the ACT does as well. So you can buy a book, you can practice online, you could take a group class, although as far as I know, they're virtual now, or you can have one-to-one with a tutor, and that's more customized. And in that way you can see, all right, I'm already good at this. This is where I need to make up ground and prep specific to your needs. But I would encourage you to space this out over time. We used to do boot camps a number of years ago, like cram classes right before a test. And I will tell you, they just don't work that well because your brain does not absorb that much, that cannot absorb that kind of information in a short period of time. It's better to space out your prep. So if you meet with a tutor, for example, have your sessions about a week apart, and then that time in between, you'll get homework and practice on that. That way it sinks into your long-term memory better, and it's there for you on test day. All right, so now within any kind of prep plan, there's actually 3 ways to improve your score. You can improve it through just strategies. These are kind of like tricks, like, should I use the work backwards strategy here? Maybe I should use process of elimination. Let's try that. Those are strategies. You could also improve your content. Maybe you didn't have a ton of grammar in school, and a lot of public school kids don't. You might have to review that. Maybe it's been a while since you were in geometry. That's content that you need to review. But really the best way to improve your score is actually through simulated full-length practice tests for 2 reasons. One is you're improving your endurance because these tests are long. Your brain gets acclimated to taking and sitting with it for a long time. And then the other thing is it really helps with your pacing. So you get a better sense of, okay, I have about this much time for this question. I have about this much time left. And that pacing is super important. But again, whenever you do these things, especially, the content review and strategies, you want to work on your area of weakness. All right, so score choice and reporting scores. And by the way, I saw a question pop up. So if you're thinking of something, throw it in the chat or the Q&A, either one, and we'll get to questions at the end. So now everybody owns their data. I mentioned my younger son. I remember when my older son was applying, he's 22 now. You had to basically send all your scores to your school. So even if you had a really bad day, you still had to send it. And it felt not fair. This was your data. But now that's not the case. You have score choice. So if you didn't do well on one test and you take it again and you crush it, send that one in. But on the ACT, it's a little bit different because now this is brand new this year. Every college will look at your super score, and the ACT just sends it in like that. So let's say you took 2 ACTs and you did better in science here, worse here, but you just kind of like did differently across the board. The ACT will automatically cherry pick your top scores from both administrations and only send those to colleges. And so for a lot of kids that are on the fence, like, should I take the SAT or ACT? I kind of like them both or dislike them both equally. Sometimes I'll go with the ACT for that reason. So that's how it works for super scoring. And the SAT is super scored as well, but it's not automatic. Schools do it manually. All right, so why does all this stuff matter? Here's the thing, at least about test scores. A small increase can make a big difference. So if you're sitting on a 25 on the ACT, for example, and you get up to 28, that's huge. 3-4 points is a huge difference and can put you in a whole nother group of schools. And it's actually something that you can control. Because honestly, if you're a junior, you can't go back and fix your grades from your freshman and sophomore year, but you can work hard to improve your test scores. You can put in a lot of time and really perfect your essays and make sure they're so solid. We do this with kids. We help them come up with their topics. We'll help them refine their essays. We help them really make sure they're technically always correct, and then press submit button on November 1st. That process of just getting everything done, if your child has any issues with executive functions, it's a ton of work. And if you want to take yourself out of it and let somebody else help your child get everything submitted, I think it's definitely well worth the money. But in general, as I mentioned before, as much as you can have your kids submit everything, get all the heavy lifting done before they start their senior year. So start in the spring, work over the summer, and get it done by November 1st. All right, so let's go to Q&A, and let's see. So my son is a freshman. His tutor has him starting ACT prep. Is there any downside to starting prep so early? I think it is early. I think that's actually pretty early. So the downside would be that it can be frustrating because you haven't had enough curriculum under your belt to know a lot of the questions, and it kind of gets defeating. Also, I found that kids over time, they feel like, oh, this is such drudgery, you know? So what I would say is, although, you know, it's not bad, I would personally put my my time and my energy into grades. I think that's a way better return on investment, especially for a freshman, because we're also not sure, you know, what is it going to be like in a couple of years? Are schools like are test optional? Could they go test blind? You know, I do think that schools are still going to look for scores from freshmen for sure. But I would say put the time in grades, because to admissions folks across the country, that's definitely more important. All right, so my son is a junior. He's thinking about taking a gap year. Should he take the test and apply to colleges next year? And if accepted, ask for a deferment or wait to apply? So here's what I would do. Because it's fresh in your mind, your son's mind now, we encourage kids, even if they think, you know, they say they're definitely taking a gap year, to still take the test. And the reason is, as I mentioned, it's fresh in your mind, but you could also change your mind. You might see all your friends going off to college, and you might think to yourself, you know what, actually, I think I want to go. And now you have a test score. The other thing I've seen with kids, one of our students is taking a gap year because he didn't get into some of his top, and he applied to schools like pie in the sky, really competitive schools. So he's going to take a gap year, and then he was going to go to the school that was kind of like lower down on his list, but in the honors program, and he was happy with that. But I said to him, you know what, maybe you should reapply. You know, here's the reality of it is that schools are suffering financially, and you know, they may not have accepted you before, but now their barrier of entry is lower because they need students. And I don't think it hurts to call the admissions department and say, can I reapply? So that's kind of unrelated. But for your junior, absolutely have him take those tests now. If he doesn't do great, he can take them later. But it's harder to get enough energy and momentum when you haven't been, you know, diligent in school for a while. All right. What has been the history of ACT exams being canceled over COVID, both in DC and Virginia? And if they happen, do kids wear masks? Yeah, so ACTs have been canceled a lot, just like SATs, but it seems like a couple of things have happened. One, they are more consistent now with bringing back tests and having them. But two, many schools have said, you know what, we're gonna have the test in the school, and just like a school day test. And so, and only for their kids. So many schools have done that too. And you know, when tests were canceled earlier this year, we saw kids go, you know, I had a kid drive to Indiana, a couple of kids drove to Pennsylvania. They did all kinds of things to take their test. So I'd look on the website and look to see where you can sign up for a test. And I would sign up early, because school or locations aren't taking as many kids. And so you want to make sure you can get in. And then, do kids wear a mask? And the answer is yes. But a friend of mine, because anybody can take an SAT and ACT, like even an adult. She is a test prep tutor. So she went to sit for an exam, and she said during the break, all the kids had masks on. By the break, they were like hugging each other. They had no masks on. They're hanging out, their arms around each other because they haven't seen each other in a long time. So although they should wear masks, I don't know if all of them do, especially during breaks. Okay, our next question, and also if you have something I haven't answered, feel free to put it in the Q&A right now. From Carmen, how many times can the student take the SAT and ACT? You can take the test a gazillion times. There is no limit on taking the test. But I will say after about 3 times, statistically, you kind of reach the point of no return where you kind of like flatline in a way. You tend not to get that much better. So, I would say I wouldn't take it more than 3 times. I don't think it's necessary, but you can really take it as many times as you want. So anything else I can answer? All right, great. Well, wait, let's see. I have one in the chat. How many colleges factoring in the impact of COVID learning on grades if a child has been disadvantaged by remote learning? And that is actually a really good question, because what I've seen in my business, and the majority of our business is executive function help and just subject tutoring. And we've seen that since everything's gone online, kids have struggled in 2 main areas. One is math, and then honestly, one isn't a subject. It's just like a general lethargy. It's just like really mustering the energy to power through it. So they're getting behind. They're not motivated to ask for help. They're having a hard time catching up. They're missing assignments, so their grades aren't that great. I think it depends on the college. So more competitive and selective colleges are going to figure in, they're not going to really care, because so many kids are applying for coveted spaces. It's not going to be in their equation. But other colleges, especially if your child can write an essay about it, they may look at your child differently. So I would say that if you're applying to, not a super top tier school, but kind of one in the middle, they will take that into consideration. But I'd also make sure that you've got, one mistake I see kids make a lot is ideally you want to have, 2 reach, 3 target, and 2 safety class schools on your list. I see so many kids, want to apply to all these reach schools. And if you're a kid and they really don't have any safety schools that they like, or like they'll have one but say, I don't want to go there, your safety schools should be ones that you want to go to. So if your grades have been affected by COVID, I would make sure that you have a really balanced list and you're really focused on those target and those safety schools too. So I hope that helps. All right. Anything else? So I'm just curious, before we call it a day, what has been helpful to you from this? If you could go into the chat and tell me a takeaway that has been particularly helpful to you, I would really appreciate it. So just travel over to the chat and tell me what you learned today or what has been helpful to you. And I'm going to read those out. I won't read your name, but I'll read those out. And sometimes they kind of recap what we've all learned and help us put it all together in our minds. So thank you so much in advance for doing that. All right, great. So the number of times to take the tests and what to focus on when prepping. My son is going to have to write a lot of different essays. And yes, it's true, he will. Addressing kids with accommodations, for sure. Certainly the ACT, the way to go. Understanding testing timelines. This is the first time I will have a child applying to college. So the general overview, in addition to the specifics, was extremely helpful. And thank you so much for sharing that. It's so hard when these are our first kids in the lineup. Seeing what colleges are looking for now when kids are entering college in the fall, the timing of the tests, the differences between the SAT and ACT and who does well in each, and then understanding the differences between the 2 tests. And yes, Kristen, thanks, the options for the practice test. So again, if you want to, they're $20, but if they're, you want them for free, I have 2 coupons I can send you, 55444, and we'll get those over to you. And then somebody also said the importance of the SATs in the future, for sure. Yes, it could change on a dime. So keep looking at those websites. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure to see you. And I wish you the very best for the school year. If you have any questions or I can help in any way, let me share with you my contact information. Here it is. Feel free to contact me at Ann at EC Tutoring. or give our office a call. You can also speak to our test prep coordinator, Karen, at 703-934-8282. Have a great day and take care. Bye-bye.